Oh, it's on. Hi. I'm just going to make a quick introduction. My name's Courtney Fink. I'm the executive director here. And I'm just really excited to welcome all of you to Southern Exposure and to welcome Odyssey Works. For those of you that don't know, Southern Exposure is a 37-year-old nonprofit visual arts organization, and our mission is to provide a home to experimental projects and to support visual artists. When I first learned about Odyssey Works, I was particularly intrigued because of how mysterious it seemed and what a hybrid form of practice it is. And SOX is the perfect home for projects that don't fit neatly into any category. And we're really excited to work with Odyssey Works over the next 6 months as they develop a new project, part of which will take place here.
Thanks, Courtney. Okay, so hi, everybody. So I was putting together this talk, and I was thinking I would come up and explain Odyssey Works to you and tell you about the ideas that led to the creation of this interdisciplinary collaborative that creates durational 24-hour performances for fully participatory audiences, blah, 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 blah. And I took a lot of notes, and I put together a lot of slides, images, videos, and I thought about the ideas again. And I came up against what I usually come up against, which is that it's very hard to concisely describe what Odyssey Works is and does. An Odyssey Works performance may involve theater, dance, the writing of a novel, poetry, good conversation, bad conversation, a person being buried alive, a walk in the woods with your mother, plastic arts, anything. So each Odyssey Works production is unique, like each of our life experiences, and the productions, they live pretty much only in the experience of the person who goes through it. So Odyssey Works pretty much creates more than specific pieces of art experiences. So I've been asked many times to give my elevator pitch for this work, and I've written a lot of grants over the years, and so I've got some idea about how you might boil the work down. But right now, before we actually go into the talk, I was hoping that you guys would indulge me in a different kind of elevator pitch, a kind of thought experiment that we could do together. So I'd like to ask you all to close your eyes right now. Just sit back, relax. If you're too cold, put on a jacket. If you're too warm, take one off. Roll your shoulders around. Enter into an imaginary space where something might happen to you. This is our low-tech virtual reality Odyssey Works experience. Okay, so now, in your mind's eye, step into that elevator that you just saw. Step in with me. You there? Okay, good. It's an elevator you know. It's in a building in town here. Can you see it? A couple of people are already in the elevator with you. There's a woman in her 40s with dark hair and a dark expression. There's a man in his 30s with a blonde beard. You think he looks a little bit Amish with that beard. Music is playing lightly over the hidden speakers in the elevator. The car has that calm but awkward quiet that you can find only in an elevator. The woman gets off on the 5th floor. The man gets off on the 7th. It is still early, not yet 10 a.m., And we've had some food and coffee, and you wish maybe you'd had more coffee. On the 12th floor, you get off, but I stay on the elevator, pointing you toward the receptionist, who is smiling at you like a receptionist.
Right this way,
he says, and you follow him down the hall to that sparse waiting room of a dental office. There are a few magazines to look at, but nothing that interests you, and an old copy of the New York Times magazine. You always read that magazine, but you seem to have missed this edition. How interesting it is. The lead article about the very thing you and Kay have been talking about all week. Kay believes that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and you believe that it is objective, that some things just are beautiful. Amazing. According to the article, scientists have been studying this very question. The first of the studies seems to point to Kay being right, that an experience of beauty is always relative to one's attitude toward the object being viewed. You react to this. It's amazing how strongly you feel about the topic, really. The next study seems to come to the opposite conclusion. There are universals when it comes to the experience of beauty. You are so engrossed. Then the drilling sound in the other room stops, and the dentist steps out with a smock on and little specks of blood on it. And he waves you in. And you think, what am I waiting here for anyway? No matter. There's Kay, with cotton in her mouth.
Kay,
You say. And Kay tries to say your name back, but the words come out muffled and incomprehensible.
you should see the article I just found in this magazine about just what we were debating.
You say. Kay again tries to answer, and you laugh, and she laughs, and then Kay takes your arm and points you toward a poster on the wall of the dentist's office. Rothko, 2 shades of red.
Yeah, I love that one.
You say. And Kay points at it again.
What?
You say, and look at it. You love that painting, but it's just a print. And so what? Just then the dentist comes back in and asks you to leave.
You can't be in here. Please go wait in the waiting room.
She says, pointing you back to the waiting room. And when she closes the door behind you, you realize that everything is different. The room is the 2 shades of red from the Rothko painting. Everything, the walls, the couches, the magazines, everything. These colors. So please open your eyes for just a second. Okay, now close your eyes again. You feel it in your stomach. Something about those colors next to one another. A kind of sweet sadness, full of loss and loneliness. It strikes a chord, and just as you are about to start explaining it to yourself, relating it to that article you were reading, where did that magazine go? A man comes into the waiting room and asks you to leave. He is wearing black, but his tie is red, like the room. And you leave, and you see everyone in line to get into the dentist's waiting room, all of them wearing those shades of red, and all of them downcast and dark. Of course they are. Who is ever happy to go to a dentist? You take the elevator down, and a car is waiting for you. You understand now that your life has been arranged, and you are intrigued. You get in the car, and the driver says something to you, in a language you do not understand. You love the sound of it, but you realize that you are to try to understand what he is saying. Oh well, it's no use. You look out the windows as the driver switches between radio stations. The usual top 20 crap, then something foreign, then love lines, and a caller is calling in about a guy she met at the dentist's office. She wanted to talk to him, but her mouth was full of cotton. The radio switches again, and he finally settles on a classic music station. And you drive and drive through the yellowing landscapes, the colors rising up in an incredible composition that you never before noticed. Then the smell hits you. Garlic. A mild aroma at first. Then it becomes thicker and thicker. How did they do that, you think? Remembering now that several months ago you filled out a questionnaire for Odyssey Works, and in it you mentioned that garlic was the smell for you of a certain kind of joy. And it is. But as the smell comes harder and harder, it becomes unbearable. Somehow, you know this is about the thing you were debating with Kay. You try to understand how they connect, to put something together. It's getting looser now, the connection between idea and experience. And then the car stops in front of a field and the driver hands you a white shirt and a pair of white pants and instructs you in perfect English. He takes your clothes, your bag, your cell phone, everything, and leads you off into a field. At first, there is nothing but the slight sound of footsteps crunching in dried grass. You look around. A woman in bright red is tracking you off to the left. Then there is another off to the right. And pretty soon the field fills with these people clad in that particular color. Are they dancers? They move like dancers. You don't know that much about dance, but their movements are somehow different. How is it that it has such an impact now? You are moved practically to tears. And you walk and follow the crowd off towards the endless field. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, you feel a hand on your shoulder. It is Kay, now with no cotton in her mouth. You are so grateful to see her. And you and she and the field full of red, or is it vermilion, walkers walk for a long time. You're only a couple of hours into the Odyssey, but already your comprehension of the world is changing. What isn't part of the performance? What passerby is not an actor? What house, not a stage set? What sound is not a composition? The next 18 hours will take you deeper and deeper into an aesthetic and narrative world that is entirely new and yet strangely familiar. Perhaps you'll spend the night on a raft with your brother. Perhaps on the other side of the mountain pass is an orchestra. Perhaps there is an airplane. Whatever it is, it represents a reordering of the world into a thing designed for the deep reception of impressions. And in the morning, when the chauffeur or the pilot or the bike escort accompanies you back into the city, you find yourself led off at the door to a gallery where there is a lecture underway. You sit down in the back. Try to catch what the speaker is talking about. As with everything today, he seems to be talking about you. If this were a real Odyssey, one made for you, he's saying, It would be entirely different. For you, Clair de Lune, that music you heard all day, may mean nothing or be abrasive. The color red may remind you of work. For you, other colors would be found, or other musics, or perhaps no music at all, no color. This particular Odyssey would be more likely made for me. These are colors that move me, ideas that I care about. What do you care about? Open your eyes, he says. Open your eyes. The man, me, I am talking about your experience. It would be totally different than what you have just experienced. You can open your eyes. It's really me saying that. Welcome back. Thanks for taking that trip with me. So this is Odyssey Works, or that was a taste of an Odyssey Works. Odyssey Works was begun more than 10 years ago when my friend Matthew Perdon, who's right here, and I were on a writer's retreat together in Big Sur. We were going for a hike in the Malera State Park and discussing the problem of the ideal audience. Matthew was a painter and a director at the time. I was a writer and an architect, and we shared the common frustration that our work would be made for us for a very particular effect. He might paint a painting that to him was meant to embody a feeling of joy. I might write a poem about sadness and loneliness, and then the work would be cast out into the world, and people, some of them would get it, and other people would not get it at all. They would have an entirely different experience from what we were talking about. And there was no way of knowing exactly how a person would receive the work. We had celebrated this in the past. People do. They celebrate the adventure of creating something that would have its own life in the world, and that is a wonderful thing. But that celebration begins to feel like an excuse after a while. I write a poem of sadness. I want you to feel sadness, not to laugh. If I had meant for you to laugh, I might have written a limerick. We had this ideal reader, viewer, audience in mind, but we didn't know who she was. Then we got to the end of the hike and stopped to have lunch on the beach. Matt finished his orange juice box and crumpled it up and left it in the sand, and we looked at it. Is it beautiful, I said to him. Yes, he said. I find it ugly, I said. We started to talk about why. Why? He loved the colors against the beige of the sand. I disliked the commercial quality of it. As we looked more, the experience morphed. And soon we were asking, what would it be to know a person so well that you could know how he would receive this impression? You could know what sort of associations he would have with a particular color, a particular shape, a particular idea. You could know whether he was comfortable standing in a gallery looking at a painting, or if he was more comfortable seeing that painting in his house, in the back of his car, held by a stranger perhaps on the bus. What if you knew his stories? What was already symbolic for him? How much more direct your writing could be. No need to try to find symbolic structures that might or might not mean something to that person. You could just write the structures you knew he already had and was open to. An idea took root in us. What is the deepest impact our art could possibly have? It was kind of an exciting one. If our art could just change one life, just one life, wouldn't it be worth it? As artists, the idea was exciting. Unintended consequences awaited us, some of which would challenge our understandings of ourselves as artists. Others that would make it clear that this idea would be a gateway to a field of other ideas and would demand exploration. The main exploration, the one that has pushed me through the last 10 years of work on the project, is the question, now central for me, of how we are affected by art. That is to say, how we are affected by the impressions that we pay attention to. Is it possible as artists to work primarily with this in mind? Last year I was artist in residence at Cornell University, and we put together a 36-hour piece. It was that long because we had to work in 6 hours of travel from New York City up to Ithaca into the schedule. Milan Collins has just finished a short film about the performance, and I wish I could show it to you, but I can't. There are all kinds of rules about things like that, where they can show at film festivals and how they can't show places first. So instead I have a 3-minute sneak peek that she put together for it that I'll show. So this is that.
I think I was just looking for something to change my perception of what was going on in my life.
Before it happened, I explained it as, it's a performance for one person and that person is me.
The largest scene of the performance will take place on the train trip from New York Penn Station to Syracuse as Christina travels to Ithaca for the performance itself. Much of that scene she'll be reading the novel that is in the process of being
ladies and gentlemen, while we are stopped here just outside of the Albany station.
I mean, this piece transformed on its head. In terms of like stereotypical structure of the art form, of theater or film.
That I lived a 36-hour dream awake. That I followed a dream narrative awake over a weekend. Because before, oh sorry.
He asked her what was he like, and she said he was everything. So like, that is the possibility. Like it's all there. It's all alive. So I feel very complete in my participation and gift to her.
And Odyssey Works is trying to take that core intention and expand it into all the different realms of art. So we study the person we're making the work for so that we can have a relationship with them, so that everything we do is about that relationship. So that's the film. The film and the performance itself were called The Midden of Possibility, which refers to this structure, which was featured in the climax of the performance. A midden, for those of you who don't know, has two meanings. One is archaeologists, they dig up a pile of trash from an ancient civilization, and they find out a lot about that civilization. That's a midden. Also, it refers to a place where rabbits store the objects and food and various little things that they gather throughout the day. So it's kind of an interspecies trash heap term. So this installation, the midden there, was where Christina spent the sunrise at the climax of her performance. She was surrounded by the symbolic and literal detritus of her life. And I'm still not entirely certain what that experience was, because she continually still says that it's too soon to talk about. And that was in March. But I can talk about how we got there. So, she's talked about the rest of the performance. Not every part is too soon to talk about. So that's her. This is Christina. She's a marketing manager at a vitamin company in Manhattan. As of when we did the performance, this is. She's also a flamenco dancer, a trained chef, a lover of Rococo and Baroque architecture, of all things Italian, especially Bologna, that city of formal symmetries and classical proportions. She also loved the pure joy of Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers and the unmitigated darkness of Ingmar Bergman. In contrast, she hated New York City, where she lived in a tiny box of an apartment in Midtown. She hated the grime and the mess of the subway, the plastic music of singers like Kesha, most contemporary art, like that, which she referred to as garbagey. And Christina was not happy with her life there in New York, amid the garbage and the stink, stuck in a relationship she didn't like, in a city she didn't like, with a decent job, but a million miles away from the elegance of the Renaissance. She also had amazing dreams. So one of the questions on her questionnaire was, what do you find most beautiful? And her response, a tree, specifically a Japanese maple. But she never goes to the park in New York because it's not real nature, it's fake nature. So, what to do for a person like that? The first thing for several months was to study, to think about her, to try to relate. The more we looked, the more we saw that the things that she loved were formally perfect, you might say, or formally solid. Ingmar Bergman's films were perfectly dark, and Fred Astaire's films perfectly happy in a certain way. Clair de Lune, that music that you've heard so much of already, that we heard a real lot of in the last year, so tightly composed. And the things that she didn't love, the things not on her radar, were those imperfect things, the formally broken things like that art that you saw, the disintegrated, the atonal, the arrhythmic. We came up with this diagram to help us think about things. There you go. It's a little burned out, but this really helped us organize our performance because we had, on one hand, the Bologna, which was those things that are perfectly good, perfectly wonderful, like Bologna, or Clair de Lune, or Fred Astaire. And then on the other side, things like death and despair and loneliness and the garbagey subway, things that were perfectly bad. That was the Bologna and the Bologna. And we spent our time sort of laying out what experiences we knew about, because she filled out this questionnaire, in her life fit where. And we spent time trying to see how those things related. And we found that much of our own work didn't really fit into Bologna or Bologna. Much of it was in this middle space. Travis Weller, a composer who works with us, makes music for invented instruments that floats from just intonation to soundscapes to atonal. Lauren Coney, that's her art. Her art is abstract and asymmetrical. Miriam Greenberg's poetry doesn't rhyme. And soon it became clear we needed to create an experience that could walk her from these more formally perfect forms to the more disintegrated forms that we work with, from the comfortable into the uncomfortable, from the Bologna to the Bologna and out into the garbagey and back into the composed, and to have her experience all of it as beautiful. So we constructed a 3-part structure for this piece, time-wise. In the first section, in the first 4 hours, she would be deeply immersed in the Bologna and the Bologna, in these perfect forms, so deeply that she would take it in like she had never taken it in before. And then in the second part, we would start mixing the Bologna and the Bologna in ways that they weren't ordinarily mixed, and then starting to take away the ordinary structures of her narrative and aesthetic life. And then in the third part, it would completely disintegrate. And she would rise from the ashes of this to create new possibilities for experience. So that was what we came to. And the performance itself, it was a 36-hour performance, but it actually started maybe a month or more before that day, because we had contacted all of her friends and her family, and with their help, we infiltrated actors into her life. She didn't know they were actors, but they got to know her as friends, or friends of friends. They didn't become close friends, but they developed real relationships. One she met while she was watching soccer, another while she was at her cousin's house, a third at a museum. And we workshopped what happened in those relationships. And when they came back, we figured out what was sort of the natural relationship between each of the actors and that person. And then later, and we found that one would represent the dark, the Bologna, and that another, based on their interactions, would represent the Bologna, all things good. And the third, transitions. And so we wrote their roles accordingly. Right? So then they were getting to know her for about 3 weeks, and then a week before the performance, she was given a copy of The New Yorker by one of the actors. She didn't know yet, of course, that they were actors. And in it was the first chapter of a posthumously published novel by the Italian author Italo Calvino, If on a Spring Day a Traveler, sequel to his novel, a little bit more popular, If on a Winter's Night a Traveler. Perhaps you've heard of it. In a series of events were described that she would later recognize as paralleling the first 4 hours of her day. Started out with a visit from a psychic in the novel. In real life, a massage therapist came to see her, and they talked about the things that were in the novel discussed by the psychic. Then she was sent out to her cousin's house, where, much like the protagonist in the novel, she encountered the actor who represented all things Bologna. The experience was intense, and she said she felt overwhelmed already by a sense of loneliness with her. Then she was taken by the transitional character, a man who in real life was very much in transition, to a series of abstractly beautiful experiences in the city. Outside St. Patrick's Cathedral, she found herself followed by a parade of vermilion-clad revelers. Her favorite color was vermilion, who were playing trumpets and singing and processing down the street until she ended up at the Palace Hotel, where suddenly Debussy's Clair de Lune was emanating from all the radios in their pockets. Later, she was taken on the subway and found that everyone on the platform seemed depressed. Many held dead plants in their hands. And the Bologna actor took her into the most garbagey spot on the platform and waited with her as she took it in. Then, near Penn Station, on the platform, another actor, there with a real tree, was reading a book, If on a Spring Day a Traveler. He gave it to her, along with an Amtrak ticket, and soon she was out of the city. So it was that the first part of the day flowed in and out of her ideas of the Bologna and the Bologna, of the ideally good and the ideally bad. And then she moved into the second part, and I have our map of this performance. It's a little hard to see from far away. somebody, could you help me hold this? Yeah. No? So this is the 36 hours of the performance. Step up. That's the 36 hours of performance. And you can maybe look over it later if you want. This here is the portion that I just described. That takes you, it's so tiny. Right. So that takes you to 1 p.m. Here you can see she rides the train. And then here we have nighttime. And midnight is somewhere around there. And you can see it's broken up into these different segments. The first part, the second part, this dream segment, and the third part. And somewhere in here there's a little bit of sleep. Oh yeah. About 4 hours of sleep. Yeah, she's an insomniac. So this gives you an idea of how we sort of measure out. This is our script. So when she was on the, you could stay there. So when she was on the train, she had the novel. This is the novel that she was given. I'll pass around. So she had all this time to actually read the novel. Right? I can pass it around if you guys want to look at it. So this novel, we wrote this novel, and it's a little different. This edition is a little different. The edition she got has no indications that it's a false novel. She was made to believe that it really was found on Italo Calvino's dead body. The novel itself, that first section tracked pretty directly the experiences that she had in the first couple of chapters tracked pretty exactly this experience in the beginning. And then as she's riding the train, it starts to trace an experience that's a little bit different, and it starts to diverge more and more and more from the actual experience she's having. So it's just a gestural relationship to her experience, but it does follow all the way through. And by the time the novel begins to represent this section, it becomes very dreamlike, and then becomes a little more poetic, and then it disintegrates from being words into images, and then later the images kind of deteriorate, and you end up with just pages and page numbers, and those disappear, and then eventually everything disappears. And so that novel became kind of the soul of this piece, the structure that followed this, that map. Thanks for holding that. And then when she was finished reading the novel, somebody came up to her on the train where she thought she was entirely alone, and handed her a radio that was stuck on a particular station. And it was fuzzing in and out of local broadcasts.
WGNA Orsakani. All right, this is WGNA Orsakani.
Thanks. And eventually, you recognize that music? We found maybe 25 different versions of Clair de Lune that got cheesier and cheesier and cheesier. And eventually the DJ came on and said that anybody with this novel had to come up to the front car in the train and have their work, have the novel inspected. And the reason I don't have the original novel to show you is because he then started tearing it up and crossing it out until it ended up looking somewhat like this.
He was the New York State regional redactor.
Right, he was the New York State certified regional redactor. And what she was left with were just these pages, which made a kind of an erasure poem of sorts. And she was left with that. So I don't have time to go into every aspect of the performance, but I would like to talk about a couple of the objects. Each of the objects went through a series of transformations, just like the structure of the piece as a whole. The novel, as I said, was read and then torn up. redacted, turned into this kind of poem. Later, these were traded in for lead type, and that lead type was gambled away at a poker game. Let's see, I think I have images of that. Oh, maybe not. And that they were gambled away. Claire de Lune, her favorite piece of music, started out beautiful and well composed as you know it. Later was replaced with these odd, cheesy versions, and later was replaced with the piece itself is only about 5 minutes, and it was replaced with an 80-minute composition that started out seemingly normal and then degenerated into a kind of almost a John Cagey piece, and then into something that sounded like chewing on piano wire. I love this, but some people are a little driven crazy by this piece. And we had her keep a dream journal for a few months. And we studied the logic of her dreams so that we could create a living dream for her, using the symbols and the emotional cues and the structural integrity of her dreams, not actually recreating one that she'd had. And when she got to Ithaca, she went through a 2-hour living dream at the university where I was working with the students there. And the dream culminated, there's the image of the poker cards, culminated in a game of poker where they were gambling lead type, using cards with no recognizable faces, until eventually she was put to sleep. Not put to sleep. Allowed to go to bed. And so that's not usually part of an Odyssey Works performance, but if we have to do it, we will. So she got about 4 hours of sleep, and then in the middle of the night, at dawn, she was awoken and taken out into this field. Now you can imagine she's hundreds of miles away from this box within a box that she lives in New York City, and she's out in this field, and she's taken to the midden, where everything in her life that had been so solid had been destroyed and left, and she was amid the detritus. And you say, what is left when everything is taken apart? And there she met again that man who had been in the train station with the tree, who had given her the novel in the first place, who had set her into this performance, as it were. And they sat together, and they raged together, and what more happened, I can't really say myself because I wasn't there, but I can say all she said about it later was that he was everything. So I'll stop there. You can see why it's hard to describe the work, and I don't know what the movie will look like when it's done because I haven't seen it, and I'm dying to. But I can tell you that I've been in touch with Christina, and after this performance, she broke her lease. She broke up with her boyfriend. She convinced her employer to let her work remotely. She moved out of the city, and now she spends much more time dancing, visiting her ailing mother, hanging around in real nature, and whenever she needs to, she takes the Amtrak down to New York City and does a little bit of work there. So, this is an idea about a way of making art. And there's this question, what is art, that I don't like very much, because it presumes a kind of an object-based definition of art, as in art is a beautiful object, or art is something that makes a statement. I prefer a more human approach, a subject-based definition. What does art do, or what does art seek to do? This would be art as action, as facilitator of impressions and experiences. It's a very subjective way of thinking about art, and it's the proposition that underlies this work. Art, or the idea of art that Odyssey Works is interested in, is one that seeks to create an impression or an experience hitherto unavailable in the realm of one's life in which it is encountered. In other words, an artistic experience is like a portal between one level of impressions and another. So intuitively, I hope this makes sense. You were having an ordinary day, and then you went to see that movie about the Holocaust, and now your day is filled with this experience of the darkness in the heart of mankind. Or you're on your way to the DMV when that song came on, the Billie Holiday one that makes you feel heartbroken even when everything is great in your life. Or maybe it was John Coltrane's A Love Supreme, and then there's something about the divine in the middle of your day. Or maybe the experience is inexplicable, like this, Morton Feldman. Play. Switch. Or maybe it's a little more obvious, like this movie. Or not. No matter what it is, it takes you out of wherever you were and moves you to somewhere else. So can we think then of art as a direction or an intentionality, a layering of a known experience, of one experience on another experience? Narrative, according to the book, is a text that supplies two layers of meaning at once. The relating of the facts and the relating of the metaphorical, meaning-based overlay. When I was young, I read the Eliot poem, The Wasteland, 100 times. And each time I did, it transported me from the ordinary experience of my day to some other place, 100 miles away from the everyday, to a place where suddenly all of human experience was visible and available and dark. And then when I was in college, I saw the whirling dervishes perform. I was fascinated, felt I was witnessing something sacred. So I read up on the practice. The whirler, they said, when performing the dance perfectly, traveled through its perfection from this world directly to the door of God's house. I read on. Whirling was part of a Sufi tradition called sema, which means hearing or audition. And it was the practice of performing dance or poetry or music or other arts until the perfection of that performance enabled the audience and the artist to transcend the present plane and ascend to the spiritual plane, even straight to God's doorstep. So this is craft as a window in a way, or art as the mysterious process that builds a house around that window. So I went, of course, to Istanbul to study with those dervishes. How could I not with an idea like that? My experience with that is hard to describe. But I can say that the experience they talked about, that of sudden transportation between states in the vehicle of an artistic experience, was real. So you've probably heard of the Sharia, like Sharia law that we have to be worried about taking over America. It's literally the wide path. And it's a set of rules, kind of a morality upon which anyone can and should walk. And branching off from that is the tariqa. It's the Sufi word for a Sufi order. And that's a narrow path that branches off from the wide path towards gnosis, or oneness with the divine, which is to say the place that art for the Sufis can take you. And I thought, wasn't this the experience of our life? We spend our days bathed in the quotidian, in the mundane, walking the wide path to work, to school, and to a nearby cafe. And then this regularity is pierced by experiences of a different level, tariqas of remarkable events and of art. So in the early days of Odyssey Works, a couple of things were clear to us. The work needed to be boundaryless, so that we could use any artistic practice we needed in order to create a particular experience. And the other was that we needed to know our audience if we were to be able to know that we could have an effect on them, hence the one-person structure. Thankfully, other artists and thinkers had previously considered some of the things we were looking at. The situationists wished to be boundaryless in their understanding of the creation of experiences. John Fowles' book, The Magus, had plotted out an idea of a theatrical situation wherein the performance, made for one person, was continuous with the themes of that person's life. And it was designed to be transformative. And Bourdieu, I can't say the name right, in his thinking on relational aesthetics, pulled under the umbrella of art a series of practices designed around the creation of relationships. And contemporary architects were looking at emerging systems theory and seeing that just as one cannot understand an artistic experience discretely, so one cannot understand that a building is alone, but it is instead related to the systems of the city, so that changing the building means changing that network of experiences in the city. So, in our second Odyssey in 2002, it was our first 24-hour long production, we created a series of experiences for Shoshana, who is still and was a close friend and Odyssey Works collaborator. Our early pieces were just among the group. It was only later that we started doing work for outsiders. And we thought we knew her well, but in our research we found a fascinating and repetitive tension between the world of ideas and the world of dance and embodied sensual and sensory experience. Her explorations in dance and her recent engagement with ideas were at a high pitch, but they had yet to meet. And we don't have a lot of video of this performance. And unfortunately, the part of it that I'd like to talk about, we don't have any documentation of it at all, because we weren't so focused on that back then. But I'll say that we broke the performance down into a series of alternating experiences of ideas and physicality, and those experiences intersected in several scenes. And the first of those was in Golden Gate Park. She was walking down the street with a friend, talking loosely about ideas that had been interesting her of late, and they happened upon one of those tunnels with the amazing echoes. And she heard the sound emanating, and she entered, and she found that the sound was her own thoughts that she had written before, and they were seemingly sourceless in the space and disembodied, and suddenly what was interior had become spatial. And she spent a few minutes listening, and then she crossed to the other side, and on the other side there was a cage, a golden cage with a note card inside, and the note card said something that involved an idea of transformation, and it was an idea that had a lot of meaning for her then already, as she had told us in our research. Much later in the day, that metaphor about metamorphosis, about transformation, became literal. And so we built a cocoon in the back of a van, and we drove her down the coast to Monterey. And she spent the night in this cocoon. And in the morning, we took her to the monarch butterfly grove down there. During the annual migration, there were millions of monarch butterflies. And by this point, she had been wrapped in this cocoon for several hours. And here is what happened next.
Our 2-hour drive has been worthwhile. We have to admit. Like, how often does this happen to people? seems like it's one of those, like, why you should smoke commercials.
What are you doing? Stop right there. What are you doing?
Oh my god.
Yeah, so that was in our earlier low-tech days. So I mentioned these moments, especially the installation, because they represent a kind of a shift in an ordinary mode of art making. In this case, the building of an installation. Ordinarily, the artist, me, for instance, I would create this installation with a self-referential set of aesthetic measures. I feel like I am in someone's head when I am in this sound space, or I love the sound of the human voice in public. It feels like imprisonment when I see a cage. It feels that way for me. It is not a suggestion. I look at a cage and I feel imprisonment. This, of course, varies from person to person. For you, a golden cage might represent some kind of sentimental antiquity or remind you of a pet bird you once had loved, or maybe one you hated cleaning up after, or it might make you feel safety. In making this installation for Shoshana, we had to find a way to get inside of her head to see how she would feel inside of an echoing tunnel. What would her reaction be to hearing her own thoughts projected? Would it fill her with wonder or with self-consciousness? What is the pace at which she listens to a recitation? What pace bores her or loses her? And what symbolic object belonged at the end of that tunnel? How would it integrate with the sense of experiencing her own thoughts? So when we create these, what is essentially a narcissistic activity, creating art for your own benefit becomes suddenly relational. I think often of a love poem as the predecessor to this work. If you're writing a love poem, you consider the vocabulary carefully. If your beloved, if my beloved is a scientist, I would make the vocabulary refer to scientific things, and I would choose it carefully. If my beloved loves wordplay, I might try to be more playful. If she is passionate about politics, I might try to find rhymes for Romney. Not easy. Does she have a short attention span or a long one? All these things come into play because I'm not looking for just a generic praise for the quality of my work. I want my work to affect her, possibly to win her affections. And no matter how good I think it is, if it does not assist in that endeavor, it's not a success. With Odyssey Works, we try to set ourselves an impossible goal, and that is to work at all the levels of experience in one's life. We try to walk in and out of poetic space, narrative space, or aesthetic space, private or public space. And to do so, we consider not only the moment of the experience we create, but all the juxtapositions between experiences. We consider what is in the mind of the participant coming into the experience, and we consider how our actors will naturally relate to that person. They sometimes spend months getting to know that participant so that when they appear on the day of the performance, they're already known and invested with meaning. We involve the participants' friends and family because these are so ever present in their daily lives. And even when they're not around, they have a continuing effect. We learn everything we can about the participants' relationship to their home, their hometown, and their place of work, to all the physical sites they have already invested with meaning, so that our work can spread into these areas. We try to consider more peripheral elements. How frenzied is the street life on the particular day of the performance? How is the weather? What is the difference between being moved in a car and being moved in a truck? All of these affect an experience, and the broader the reach of an Odyssey Works piece, the greater the effect it can have on both the lives of the participants and of the artists involved. So a moment of well-crafted art is like a step through a particular portal of experience, and Odyssey Works tries to open that portal for an entire day, to place it everywhere you turn, and to suggest that it needn't close behind you the next day.